Well, what is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Obviously, coming off another crazy weekend of college football. I'm going to have 11 or 12 takeaways today, which we had, I think, 12 last week. I think the first 2 weeks we started out with 8. So we're starting to get into the nuts and bolts of it here in this college football season. Before we get started, just want to say, please like the video. That really helps out the growth of this channel, and I'd appreciate that. Subscribe so you don't miss any of the upcoming content. Have individual game breakdowns like we've had here throughout the first month. So be sure not to miss those. Started a hot seat series last week that will be updated here after week 4. I'm also going to do a video about the biggest storylines going into week 5. So lots of content coming up this week. Be sure you're subscribed. Quick betting recap. We went 6-5 here in week 4, but kind of a theme here early in the season, just kind of a stalemate. Down about a quarter of a unit here. You see the results right here. A few tough best bet losers with Clemson. Clemson scored 51 points and still didn't cover a one-possession spread. If you would have told me that going into yesterday, I would have said you were crazy. We're going to get more into that game here in a second. The Minnesota-Michigan State over hurt because I got the Minnesota part of it right. Didn't really think that we'd see that flat of a performance from Michigan State at home, but we did. I'm not going to spend too much time on the rest of these. Did get some of our smaller plays, some really good looks there. Tulsa was a good look. That Virginia under was a good look. Rutgers team total was probably the best look of the day. I said that was the biggest mismatch on the board was Rutgers offense versus Iowa's defense. So good to get that one right. Kansas State was the right side. We had a lot of good looks. Didn't necessarily allocate my units right because we went 6-5 and we still lost a little bit. So I think I had almost 200 plays in college football last year. We're still through 40 plays. So given I hit 55%, netted 27 units last year, still feel great about what we've got coming up the rest of the way. But without further ado, let's get straight into the takeaways. The first game I want to talk about here is that Arkansas-Texas A&M game. Late at night, obviously a primetime game on ESPN. So first of all, I teased Arkansas up to 9. Unfortunately, we had the other leg of that teaser lose earlier in the day. That was a good look because I knew this game was going to come down right to the very end. Arkansas, Texas A&M always comes down to the end. Arkansas came out hot. They got up 14-0 quickly. I love that offensive system. KJ Jefferson played really well yesterday. He doesn't throw the ball a lot, but when he does a lot of damage. He had a long touchdown pass that put him up 14-0 early. It looked like Arkansas was going to be able to control that game from start to finish. The big key for A&M and what A&M fans have got to be happy about coming off yesterday's win, they got Devon Achane going. That was kind of an issue those first 2 weeks of the season. Got him going a little bit last week, but he had a chunk, I want to say a 63-yard run early in the second quarter. That got their offense going a little bit. When you don't have a very lethal passing offense, you got to have explosiveness come from somewhere. It was good to see Devon Achane get going a little bit yesterday. Obviously, the key to that game, though, and the one play that both teams can look back on and say, well, that directly impacted the result. KJ Jefferson, 1st and goal, reaches for the pylon, fumbles, A&M takes it all the way back. KJ Jefferson has played too much football to make that kind of mistake. It's not 4th and goal. It's 1st and goal. I think they're on the 2-yard line, just running a quarterback power. Tries to extend it over the pylon, and he wasn't even particularly close to the goal line either. That's just a mistake that you cannot make as an experienced player. Obviously, it was the deciding factor in the game. If you're A&M, you're not going to apologize about it. You forced them into a mistake, but that really kind of dampened Arkansas's offense. Their next 3 drives, just 1 first down, 10 plays, 19 yards. That was really a huge momentum shift in the game. And really from there, A&M was really able to take control of that game. They ended up going up 9 at one point. They got down 14-0. At one point, they got up 23-14. And so that game kind of got flipped on its head by that one play alone. I thought Max Johnson for Texas A&M, if you look at his stat line, nothing's going to really jump out at you. Didn't play great. He was pressured all night. We knew how good Arkansas's pass rush was going to be. He was under a lot of duress. I don't think just the amount of sacks Arkansas got is going to really tell you that story. Max Johnson was dealing with pressure all night. He found a way to keep the offense moving, especially as that game went on. Arkansas had success early, but Max Johnson played pretty well. Got to give him credit. It's not a pretty performance. A&M's offense is still not clicking whatsoever, but Max Johnson was able to move the chains and make some big throws under duress. Very sneaky, too. He had 13 carries yesterday. He is not a runner at all. So seeing him get involved in the run game, I think, it kind of signifies that Arkansas was winning up front, but, give this offense credit. They're making with what they've got, and with that defense they have, with how they were able to kind of stymie Arkansas's offense in that third quarter, it was good enough for them to win the game. Obviously, at the end, that was one of the crazier, game-winning field goal attempts I've seen. The broadcast was talking about how he didn't strike it very well, but I mean, he kicked the hell out of it. I mean, hits the top of the upright and comes straight down. Like I said, I didn't envision this game playing out any differently. Arkansas, Texas A&M, aside from last year where Arkansas just totally dominated that game, this is always a game that comes down to the wire. And so in all, I mean, I still love this Arkansas offense. Very efficient on the ground. They weren't as efficient on the ground as I think they would have liked to be yesterday, but KJ Jefferson kind of took over that game, and I thought he played really well. It really comes down to Arkansas can't turn the ball over on the goal line and can't let A&M run it all the way back. That's a 13 point swing in a game that came down to the wire. As for Texas A&M, it doesn't have to be pretty. You've got a good defense. You got Devon Achane going yesterday. This is a team at this point. I mean, we saw it with last week when they played Miami. Some might say they didn't deserve to win that game. I mean, they forced Miami into some field goals. They got outgained in a lot of areas last week, but they found a way to win. They found a way to win yesterday. It doesn't always have to come down to playing to winning decisively. I mean, this is not a team offensively that's really going to get much better throughout the year. It's hard to see this passing game ever being lethal whatsoever this year. They're going to have to win games like this, and that's 2 games in a row that weren't pretty, but a dub is a dub. So I don't think A&M's apologizing about anything coming off of last night. Great game in the SEC here early in conference play. Tough loss for Arkansas, tough one to swallow, but nevertheless, good win for the Aggies. That's back-to-back weeks. Backs against the wall, and they come through. All right, I kind of alluded to this earlier, but Clemson, they ended up surviving yesterday at Wake Forest, 51-45 in overtime, in double overtime, actually. I was on Clemson -7 as a best bet. I felt really good early in that game. They came out really early to a 14-0 lead. First play of the game was a chunk run by Will Shipley. I couldn't have felt better about Clemson going into yesterday. Thought that was a game that they were going to win by double digits pretty comfortably. Got off to that hot start. You give Wake Forest credit. They really just started going exclusively out of an RPO system, very slow developing, drawing Clemson's front 7 in. And then really what we saw yesterday, Wake Forest, Sam Hartman, those receivers absolutely exposed Clemson secondary. We knew Clemson lost 3 starters in that unit coming off of last year's team. I didn't think it'd make as big of an impact on this game as it did, but that's what they did. It wasn't just one guy. It wasn't just one receiver that was exposing Clemson secondary. We just saw Wake Forest take advantage of a pretty big mismatch. And I felt like Clemson had such an advantage in the trenches defensively coming into this game that I didn't think Sam Hartman would have time to do that. I think early in that game, we saw that play out, but give Wake Forest credit. They eventually became a one-trick pony, but it worked. I mean, Sam Hartman, 29 attempts, 337 yards, 6 touchdowns, no interceptions. No, they didn't run the ball, and I knew they wouldn't be able to run the ball, but they didn't need to. The main question around Clemson assuredly was their quarterback play, and putting up 51 points and still having that game coming down to the wire sucks. I thought DJ Oyunglele played great though. I mean, 371 yards, 5 touchdowns, no picks. Was a threat in the run game as well. He made as many big chunk plays down the field as Hartman did. That was kind of an area of concern for Clemson coming into yesterday. My opinion on DJ Oyunglele up to this point is that he will be replaced at some point. That's still possible. But if you're a Clemson fan, you've got to feel a lot better about your offense coming off of yesterday. I will say just one note about, something that's easy to look back on, frustrating. Clemson did have to settle for 2 field goals in the second quarter when I felt like they were still moving the ball well and probably could have capitalized and extended the lead there in the second quarter, but they didn't. Had to settle for 2 field goals. I mean, Wake Forest in the second half, they had an 8-7 point lead for most of the second half, and that was really Clemson having to fight back and get back in that game. We'll see how big of an issue this Clemson secondary continues to be. I mean, they're going to have maybe even a tougher matchup this coming week against NC State. Yes, you get them at home, but I mean, I think Devin Leary is every bit of the quarterback that Sam Hartman is. I think that he might have more playmakers on the outside than Wake Forest does. So, and I'm not necessarily trying to compare those two right now. It's 2 of the better, deep passing offenses in the ACC. So if Clemson doesn't get that fixed, that matchup can easily be exploited this coming week. NC State, much like Wake Forest, is not probably going to be able to run the ball all that well. As we saw yesterday, if Clemson can't get that fixed, it won't really matter. So I'm interested to see kind of what adjustments Clemson makes in that secondary. As for Wake Forest, as much as I feel like Clemson probably should have won that game by double digits, you have to tip your cap. And, Sam Hartman's a very experienced player. The prior 5 years against Clemson, Wake Forest lost by an average of 34 points per game. So this was kind of a anomaly kind of performance. They usually aren't competitive when stepping up in competition, particularly against Clemson. But I thought Dave Clawson actually coached pretty well yesterday. As much as I've kind of had my doubts about him in the past, great game by Sam Hartman. Good to see him back out there. Good win for Clemson. Got pushed to their limits, but found a way to get that one done. All right, third takeaway here from week 4. Tennessee had lost 16 of their last 17 against Florida coming into yesterday. Obviously, though, much different matchup. As 10.5-point favorites, much different dynamic around that game. They finally get over the hump. They beat Florida. It wasn't pretty necessarily. Florida covered. Florida stepped up much better than I think a lot of people thought they would. Defense has really stepped up early in this game. Both defenses got some red zone stops. I mean, the total in that game was very high. And what's funny is there wasn't much scoring in the first quarter. And eventually both offenses got going. That over did come through. So it didn't even really matter. But, this is kind of a defensive stalemate early in the game. My main takeaway from and the reason I couldn't lay 10.5 with Tennessee, rivalry game. It's easy to say, Tennessee has all these matchup advantages across the board. It's still a matchup that you haven't won but once in the last 17 years, and it's a rivalry game. From a matchup standpoint, their defense just allows too many explosive plays. Anthony Richardson, and this is why I say if you're a Florida fan, I know it's disappointing to lose this game, but your offense showed a lot yesterday. Anthony Richardson had really struggled through the air the past 2 weeks. Kentucky and South Florida both did a really good job of limiting him into the pocket. And when you keep a run-first quarterback in the pocket, he's probably not going to be as effective. Well, he did run more yesterday, and he ran pretty effectively, but he gashed Tennessee through the air. 24-44, 453 yards. Nobody saw that coming. I couldn't even on my best day imagine that Anthony Richardson would have carved up Tennessee's defense for that many yards. But Tennessee was able to move the ball pretty consistently in this one. And I still think Tennessee, for as explosive as that offense is, and we're going to get to that in a second, we even saw it against Pitt. Keaton Slovis created explosive plays through the air. You might have lost that game if Keaton Slovis didn't get hurt right before the half. And Pittsburgh got a 75-yard touchdown run in that game. This Tennessee defense is still somewhat leaky. That was the case a year ago. And even if they have improved, it doesn't mean that they're so stout to where they can't be had in this sort of matchup. So I thought Anthony Richardson played pretty well for Florida. With that being said, Hendon Hooker really just kind of took over this game. 22 of 28, 349. Oh, and 112 yards on the ground. I got to tell you, I sprinkled on Hendon Hooker at 60-1 to win the Heisman Trophy preseason. Played really well this year. He was playing just as good last year, too. Maybe not from the counting numbers this well, but he was very efficient a year ago. And that's why I was willing to, sprinkle on him to win the Heisman Trophy. He's living up to the bill this year. As that game wore on, this Tennessee offense is just extremely efficient. I think what's underrated about them is they can run the football very efficiently. And when you have the quarterback run in there as well, makes that even more so. But Hendon Hooker as a passer looked fantastic yesterday. Florida was able to get a little bit of pressure, but still, you're not going to keep that offense down for too long. I know Florida stepped up well early, but eventually, if you give Hendon Hooker time, he's gonna pick you apart with his feet and his arms. So that's really why the Vols were able to pull away. They got up 17 at one point in this game, but they almost squandered that lead late. They recover the onside kick and then just fall short on the Hail Mary. Once again, I know Tennessee's probably got to finish a little bit better. I saw some Vol fans saying that yesterday as kind of the main theme. Nobody right now is thinking about how the end of that game went. You beat Florida. You haven't beat Florida very much. This is a big win for Tennessee. Even if they didn't cover, games don't get played out on paper. This is a rivalry game. You won the game. Hendon Hooker is one of the best quarterbacks in college football. A lot to be excited about if you're Tennessee. But I got to say, I was actually somewhat surprised and encouraged by what we saw from Florida. I've said what I had to say about Florida. I played them under the 7 wins this year. They're now 2-2. We'll see how they fare throughout the rest of the season. Give Richardson credit. I didn't think if they were going to have success offensively, this is how we'd see it happen, but it was. So really good game on that afternoon window on the CBS game of the week. All right, takeaway number 4. We saw a shakeup in the Big 12 yesterday. Texas and Oklahoma, the 2 betting favorites to win that conference preseason. Well, they're both 0-1 in conference play now, both upset yesterday. We're going to get into both of those and then kind of talk about the overall impact this has on the Big 12. We'll start with Texas because it happened first. We'll go chronologically here. I said this before. I'm a diehard Texas fan. I don't talk about Texas a lot from a betting perspective on this channel, but obviously no Quinn Ewers yesterday. Went down against Alabama, hasn't played the last 2 weeks. He suited up, but he didn't play. Don't particularly get that. If he's suiting up, why is he not playing? And if he's not healthy enough to play, he shouldn't be suiting up. So kind of a secondary point. The reality of it is, though, that should have impacted the game. We came out offensively, put up 24 points in the first half. Hudson Card played really well, used his legs. The one thing about not having Quinn Ewers is it really kind of negates any of our deep threats down the field. Quinn Ewers' strength is being able to strike on those deep shots. That happens to be Hudson Card's weakness. In my opinion, no, that shouldn't impact this game. Hudson Card is good in the short to intermediate passing game. We have Bijan Robinson. We have Roschon Johnson. There's still no excuse to kind of be as poor as we were offensively in the second half. The reality of this game, though, is Texas Tech ran 40 more plays than Texas. They ran almost 100 plays on offense. Texas plays this sort of bend, don't break defense, which I hate. Texas Tech turned the ball over 5 times these past 2 weeks. Donovan Smith is a turnover waiting to happen. Why you would give him any easy completions underneath is beyond me. And, they really took advantage of that. They're an air raid system. They thrive on that really short, quick passing game. And we just played right into their hand. And in turn, we couldn't get off the field. They were consistently in 3rd and 4th and short. They converted. That is set up by our approach on first down, which is we gave a pretty vulnerable quarterback easy completions underneath. And that really, they totally controlled the time of possession. They kept our offense off the field. Where this game was really decided, though, is in the second half. For all the creativity we showed early on, Texas Tech came out with a great defensive game plan in the second half. And they loaded the box. They said, you're not running the football on us. And what do? We ran the football. We were running into 8-men boxes. I thought Steve Sarkisian called a poor game in the second half. I thought we had a lot of success in the passing game in the first half. And he just kind of took the ball out of Hudson Card's hands. It didn't help that our best receiver, Xavier Worthy, went down. But you got to be able to overcome stuff like that. If you're the big bad University of Texas, it shouldn't impact the result. So a bad loss. And, I'm not going to talk anymore about it because I got a lot to say. As far as Oklahoma, I was on Kansas State first half plus the 7.5. Man, what a game for Adrian Martinez. This is a guy that showed flashes at Nebraska. He was actually a pretty good player at Nebraska last year. He was almost at 9.5 yards per attempt. Adrian Martinez coming into this game was criminally underrated as a passer. And I get it because I feel like Kansas State offensively through the first 3 weeks just didn't show much in their passing game. You knew it was there. And it's not surprising necessarily that we saw it come out yesterday. 234 yards through the air, not really going to wow you. But when you pair that with 148 yards in the ground for Martinez, just a take a bow kind of performance. He played extremely well for Kansas State. Deuce Vaughn is Deuce Vaughn. I thought Oklahoma played the run fine with Deuce Vaughn, but when you have to worry about Vaughn and Martinez in the run game, makes it a little bit harder. So I thought Kansas State came out with a great game plan. I played them in the first half. I should have played them in the full game because they were just as good offensively down the stretch of that game as they were early. Oklahoma, Dylan Gabriel, 26 to 39, didn't turn the ball over, 330 yards. I still felt like he left some plays out there on the field. Coming into the year, he was right around 61% completion throughout his career. What that implies is, and he was at 9 yards per attempt, so the explosiveness is there. He's very familiar running this veer and shoot offense, but I felt like he left some plays out there last night. And I feel like watching the tape, if you go rewatch that game, I remember he had Drake Stoops wide open down the seam for, I think, a 50-yard walk-in touchdown. He missed him. I felt like there was a stretch of that game where Kansas State was kind of lucky to get off the field, and Dylan Gabriel left some plays on the field. It's pretty hard for Oklahoma to feel too bad about their offense. I thought Eric Gray actually ran the ball pretty well. What this game comes down to is we just saw Kansas State win the game. This was not a fluke. I'm not saying that necessarily Kansas State can win that way consistently throughout the season. If Martinez plays as well as he did yesterday, they will. Obviously, though, he's made some mistakes in his past, but he didn't turn the ball over yesterday. With Texas and OU going down, talking about the overall landscape of the Big 12 now, I was talking to somebody on Twitter last night about this, because he said both teams look bad, and now Baylor and Oklahoma State are clearly the best teams in the conference. I think we're going to see things like we saw yesterday happen throughout the season in the Big 12. I think especially now with Kansas being 4-0, which is not going to make the show today. We're not going to talk about that, but hats off to Kansas now, 4-0. There are no bottom dwellers in this conference. Tech won yesterday. TCU won yesterday. West Virginia won on Thursday night. Where is the easy win in this conference at this point? So I don't think anybody can clearly say that, these are clearly the two top teams in the conference. We saw Oklahoma go down yesterday. They've run that conference for a long time. Doesn't look like that's going to be the case this year. It's going to be probably a revolving door of teams at the top that lose to the 6th, 7th best team in the conference. That's going to be a theme throughout this season. There's so much parity in the Big 12. And I think you saw that while Texas no betting favorites, neither one of those were clear betting favorites. I think both of them were around, plus 200 to win this conference. So we should have envisioned this happening coming into the year. If you're claiming to have a good feel about who's going to make the Big 12 title, I don't know what to tell you. It's going to be madness throughout the course of this season. All right, Ohio State last night. We obviously saw them week 1 against Notre Dame in a very similar type game. Not really come out, and they were laying this very similar number, 17.5, 18.5. They weren't able to get their offense going against Notre Dame. That wasn't the case last night. That game against Wisconsin was over before it started. I mean, Ohio State got up 21-0 after the first quarter. JSN was out. They had a lot of key players out last night. It didn't matter. Now, I was a little bit gun shy to bet them just because, like I said, I bet them week 1 against Notre Dame. I was in wait and see mode with Wisconsin because they lost a pair of really good linebackers off of last year's team. And I was kind of wondering, were they going to be able to replicate that so easily to where they're going to present a pretty big threat to Ohio State? Travion Henderson and Mayan Williams ran the ball at will last night. CJ Stroud only threw the ball 27 times because he didn't need to throw it more. And he was very efficient when he did. Over 10 yards per attempt, 5 touchdowns. This was a total mismatch. And listen, Wisconsin ran the ball well. Braylon Allen, 23 carries, 165 yards, but Graham Mertz is terrible. And I've held out hope that maybe he's going to develop into a pretty good player at the college level. He was the highest rated high school recruit that at the quarterback position that Wisconsin had ever gotten. Didn't even throw for 100 yards last night. He is no threat in the vertical passing game. And, it's not overly surprising that Ohio State absolutely curb stomped Wisconsin. So good for the Buckeyes. Really, since that week 1 game against Notre Dame, last week against Toledo, 77 points. You put up 52 points against what was a top 10 defense in the country in Wisconsin a year ago. Impressive stuff. And you weren't at full strength either. So they've got a pretty favorable schedule coming up. They play Rutgers at home next week. Should be a very similar type of result. Rutgers is a bad football team. They go to Michigan State, but we're going to talk about Michigan State, but that shouldn't be much of a threat either. There is a clear path for the Buckeyes to continue rolling the way they are right now. As for Wisconsin, the Big 10 West, we just talked about it with the Big 12. I think it's going to be very similar, where it's pretty hard to have a great feel about who emerges in that side of the Big 10. Listen, Wisconsin plays Illinois next week. Illinois has one of the best running backs in college football. Go look at what Chase Brown has done this year. If you have questions around stopping the run, that's going to get exploited next week. I know you're at home. You shouldn't be surprised about what we saw from Wisconsin. As good as Braylon Allen played, when you're stepping up in competition like that, you've got to get more than 94 yards out of your quarterback. And really, when you get down 21-0 early, that becomes even more true. There's nothing good to take away from a 31-point loss in conference play when you are still a pretty traditionally good program. All right, guys, I want to take a break in the action real quick. I know you see this shirt right here. I know you've been staring at it the whole time. If you're wondering, how can I look as cool and sexy as the guy that I'm staring at on my screen right now? I'll tell you. Go to proud90.com and browse their selection. They got a slew of unique but very comfortable polos as well, t-shirts, hoodies, quarter zips. Recently added a ladies line. Proud 90's got all your golf apparel needs. If you see anything you like at checkout, use code Fordham. It's going to get you 15% off your entire order. That's code Fordham. It's going to get you 15% off your entire order. Support me, support Proud 90. Check the description for more information or go to proud90, proud90.com. Let's get right back into the video. All right, we saw USC last night get pushed to their limits. First true road test. I know they played at Stanford. Not really a true road test like last night was. Playing out Oregon State. Give them credit. They won the game. I was on Oregon State very small. I sprinkled on their money line to win that game outright. Had every chance to do so late in the game. The reality of it is neither offense wanted to win that game. Caleb Williams looked like trash, and we'll talk about that in a second. But, Chance Nolan for Oregon State. Can't throw 4 picks when stepping up in competition and expect to win the game. And they had every chance to do so, but 3 turnovers in the second half. Chance Nolan has got to be feeling pretty rough about things this morning, because that was a big opportunity for Oregon State, and they pretty much squandered it. For all the talk about Jordan Addison, Caleb Williams, the Lincoln Riley, the increase in USC's passing game, how about Travis Dye? I mean, Travis Dye last night really kept the Trojans in that game. He right now looks like the most valuable addition in the short term for USC. Yes, Caleb Williams and all those playmakers on the outside over time and going into next year will be big for what Lincoln Riley is trying to do there. But the addition of Travis Dye is proving to be very huge early this season. Now, Caleb Williams, we saw him struggle at times for Oklahoma last year, and for as good as he played against Texas, for as good as he played in some of their inferior games, he stunk against Iowa State. He stunk against Baylor. He played fine against Oklahoma State, but he is vulnerable in his tougher road matchups. I mean, 16 of 36, 180 yards. That's not the Caleb Williams that everybody hypes up every week. And this just shows you, and I said this in my game breakdown, for as much as USC added in the transfer portal, it's not always that simple. These pieces still haven't played a lot of football together, and winning on the road is tough. Corvallis, a tough environment to go win in. That's a really underrated Oregon State team. It's not the most surprising thing that Oregon State defensively kind of had their way with Caleb Williams and had their way with this USC offense. One of the claims I made in this game was I wouldn't suggest taking Oregon State on the spread, because I think they're either going to win this game outright or they're going to lose by 20. The game didn't play out like that, because, I mean, the total was 70.5. And this is 17-14 games. So this was much more of a low-scoring defensive slugfest. From that aspect, kind of read it wrong. Would have been good to have Oregon State plus the 6, plus the 6.5. Can't throw 4 interceptions and when stepping up in competition and expect to win. You had every chance to do so. Good win for USC. Not pretty, but a win is a win. Much rather learn some of these lessons in a win. But USC, much like we kind of saw with Ohio State a few weeks ago when they played Notre Dame, just because these teams have a ton of talent, it doesn't mean we're going to see that week in, week out. Caleb Williams has still got lots of development ahead. This is probably my sharpest, best look of the day. I had Notre Dame plus the 2 yesterday going to North Carolina. I said that I had this game read perfectly, and there were some other games I didn't, so I'm going to pat myself on the back on this one. I had this game handicapped to a T. I said, because everybody was talking about, the biggest mismatch in this game is North Carolina's offense versus Notre Dame's offense, and pulling out all those numbers. The biggest mismatch in this game, and it wasn't close, was North Carolina's defense versus Notre Dame's defense. North Carolina's defense is terrible. Terrible. This is the thing about North Carolina. People were ready to make these huge claims about them and how they would step up in this matchup based off what they saw against App State and Georgia State. I'm not saying either of those matchups on the road is easy, but it's still clearly inferior competition. Notre Dame, on the other hand, played Ohio State. Marshall was a sneaky G5 team, and Cal has got a good defense. So reassures me a lot of what I put stock into when handicapping these games. North Carolina's offensive line is not good. It just so happens that Notre Dame's strength defensively is getting pressure on the quarterback. We saw that play out yesterday, but even more so, Notre Dame was able to get their run game going offensively. And Audric Estime, 134 yards on the ground. Chris Tyree, 80 yards on the ground, over 5 yards a carry. I mean, Notre Dame ran the ball at will. I like them in the trenches on both sides of the ball. This is the first time all year that they were really able to break off some chunk runs, and give credit to Drew Pine. Obviously, he was the backup quarterback entering this year. Tyler Buckner goes down. North Carolina got off to a hot start in this game in the first quarter. Drew Pine made major strides throughout this game, stepped up in the pocket, made some really good throws, but really, North Carolina's defense, showed us who they were. And, they gave up 61 points at App State. They should have given up more than 28 against Georgia State. This is maybe a bottom 20 defense in college football. I mean, we saw wide open receivers all day for Notre Dame. Michael Mayer had a walk-in touchdown. I think he found Logan Diggs on a walk-in wheel route touchdown. Did Drew Pine. So it'll be interesting to see, if Notre Dame is really taking that next step offensively, or if this is really just how bad North Carolina's defense is. Probably a little bit of both. Everybody and their mother looked at that line, and including me. My first look at that line was, I think North Carolina can just pretty simply outscore Notre Dame. But when I handicapped that game, I saw some of these matchup disadvantages, and it was really good to see that play out the way I thought it would. Good win for the Irish. Marcus Freeman has kind of answered the bell here these last 2 weeks, and especially in this game. Winning on the road against a veteran head coach in Mac Brown should inspire a lot of confidence in Notre Dame fans. I love Mac Brown. He might be washed up. He's in year 4. They still suck on the offensive line. They still have a terrible defense. So be interesting to see if North Carolina can make any sort of noise in the ACC this year. But bigger takeaway by far, really, really big bounce back win for the Irish. Speaking of the ACC, Miami. An inexplicable loss at home yesterday to Middle Tennessee State. They came out completely flat. Coming off of last week's tough loss at Texas A&M, they came back yesterday and looked like they didn't want to be there. I mean, first 3 drives offensively, 3 turnovers. That gave Middle Tennessee the edge early in that game. But let's not act like, that's the reason. I mean, Middle Tennessee got out early, and then that was the reason why they won the game. Middle Tennessee's quarterback, Chase Cunningham, listen to this. 16 of 25, 408 yards, over 25 yards per completion, explosive plays of 98 yards, 89 yards, 69 yards. I mean, Miami just got pantsed in their secondary. They were content playing one-on-one matchups, and Chase Cunningham, played really well for Middle Tennessee State, but Miami, 25 yards per completion against Middle Tennessee State. I mean, that is embarrassing. I didn't envision this happening, clearly. I've said about Miami, though, it's hard for a first-year head coach like Mario Cristobal to come into a program that struggled under Manny Diaz, that had issues defensively. It's hard in year 1 for that to just get turned around immediately. It's going to take time for Mario Cristobal to turn that around. Still didn't think they would lose at home to Middle Tennessee State. For as much hype as Tyler Van Dyke got, he has not played well these past 3 weeks. The offense looked very poor against Southern Miss a few weeks ago. They didn't look good. I mean, they didn't even get into the end zone last week against Texas A&M. And then he got benched in this game. I mean, they eventually moved towards Garcia because the offense looked totally lifeless. I don't think it's all on Van Dyke, clearly. I mean, the offensive line is still not very good. They're still not running the ball the way they should. And I talked about last week how they got a real issue at wide receiver. We all want Miami to be back. We all want Miami to be good. We can't will it to happen. It takes time. Miami is not going to be a contender in the ACC this year. I like Mario Cristobal a lot. He was if he played at Miami, he did a great job of, accumulating a lot of talent at Oregon. I thought he did a really good job at Oregon. This is not a quick fix. And I think yesterday showed that. Really shocking loss at home for the Hurricanes. All right, Michigan, now that they finally played a team with a pulse, and don't get mad at me if you're a Michigan fan about saying that. I know these schedules get made in advance, but, the first 3 weeks of the season, Michigan played 3 bottom 10 teams in college football. So J.J. McCarthy is obviously a very talented quarterback. He looked great against Air those first 3 weeks, but Michigan got pushed a little bit yesterday. Give Maryland a lot of credit. I'm, higher on Maryland than most. I played them over the 5.5 wins this year. They're 3-1 now. I feel good. I think that team's going to win 7, maybe even 8 games this year. I like Maryland. I think Talia Tagovailoa is really good for that Mike Locksley system. Mike Locksley has got talent on the outside. We saw Maryland's offense have some success yesterday, but really Michigan's offense in that first half specifically, they got pushed a little bit too. I mean, J.J. McCarthy played fine, and especially down the stretch of the game, he did make some good throws for a young guy. Actually showed quite a bit of composure in a game that was a lot closer than people thought it would be. J.J. McCarthy is human too, and I wouldn't say that yesterday is a bad thing if you're a Michigan fan. It's good, especially going to play Iowa next week. You don't want to go into that Iowa game thinking that you're untouchable. I actually think it was good to get pushed a little bit. It was good for J.J. McCarthy to know that, all right, it's not as easy as, we get to play UConn and Colorado State every week. I thought that Michigan offense responded well to that. And Blake Corum totally took over that game. 30 carries, 243 yards. Blake Corum, along with Hendon Hooker. I got Blake Corum at 100-1 to win the Heisman Trophy. Yesterday helps. And Hendon Hooker playing as good as he did yesterday helps. Blake Corum was very explosive last year as a freshman. Obviously, with Hassan Haskins moving on to the NFL, that gives Corum more opportunity to break out. We saw him break out in a huge way. And that's so invaluable to a young quarterback that's, still, like we saw yesterday, not going to be as sharp as he was early in the season. Throughout the course of this season, to have a guy like Blake Corum who can break off those chunk runs, very, very invaluable. So I think Michigan's a very good team. We'll see what that line opens at when they play at Iowa this coming week. I think that's going to be a really close game. Iowa has got the second best defense in college football. And that gap between Georgia and Iowa is not as big as people think. That Iowa defense is nasty, and J.J. McCarthy might struggle in that game again. We'll talk more about that game coming into this week. I think it was actually good for Michigan to kind of get that feeling of we're inevitable out. Give credit to Maryland. They covered the point spread with ease. But I think that's games where both teams can take a lot of positive away. And obviously Michigan's got a huge game coming up at Iowa on Big Noon kickoff this coming week. Now, this shouldn't be all that surprising at this point because we've seen a lot of crazy endings at Jordan-Hare Stadium in Auburn, Alabama. But now I understand that maybe long-term, the ramifications of yesterday's game might not have been as much as like when Auburn beat Georgia in 2013 on that, miracle prayer at Jordan-Hare or the kick six. But, man, Missouri had a chance to, end the game in regulation, kick the game-winning field goal, I think from 25 yards away. They missed the kick. So now the game goes into overtime. Auburn kicks a field goal. Missouri is running the game-winning touchdown into the end zone. The running back is trying to switch hands with the ball, fumbles the ball on the 1-yard line. Auburn picks it up in the end zone. Game over. I mean, you can't make that up. And if you're a Missouri fan, it's just demoralizing, and it's pretty inexcusable to have two separate, just total puking on yourself type of moments to lose that game on the road in a game you should have won. And I don't really know how Auburn fans feel. I bet you there's a crowd out there for Auburn that said, just get this era over with. Lose this game so we can just get rid of Brian Harsin, because now you can't fire Brian Harsin after winning this game. And now you play LSU this coming week. You're not going to fire him now, but that was an ugly game yesterday. I actually felt like Auburn came out. I mean, obviously with no TJ Finley, it was Robbie Ashford at starting quarterback. I thought that was a matchup that they'd be able to have their way in the run game. Tank Bigsby, give Missouri's defense credit. They really kind of shut down Tank Bigsby. I thought Robbie Ashford actually played pretty well, both as a runner, and then I thought he threw better than maybe I thought he would. But still, I mean, they got up 14-0 and then didn't score a touchdown the rest of the game. We're going to talk about both of these coaches, Eli Drinkwitz and Brian Harsin, here in this week's Hot Seat episode. So stay tuned for that. But had to bring that up. Just utterly shocking way to end that game yesterday morning. How about Oregon too? Give credit to Oregon. On the road yesterday at Washington State, they got down early. They were down for the majority of that game. Looked like Washington State was going to pull out the outright upset at home. Give credit to Bo Nix. I've talked a lot, and it's why I couldn't have been on Oregon yesterday. I don't trust Bo Nix as a passer consistently in the vertical passing game. Aside from that week 1 game against Georgia, I mean, he looked really good against BYU last week. Oregon obviously put up 44 points yesterday. Now, defense is another concern, but you're on the road. You found a way to win the game late. I don't think anybody's really concerned overall. I mean, a win is a win, honestly. Perhaps this is just a better fit for him than maybe that Gus Malzahn and certainly maybe last year, that Brian Harsin type of offense. Not everything falls on Bo Nix here. You've got so much speed on the outside. You got so much speed sharing the backfield with you at that running back position. Probably more playmakers at Oregon than he had specifically at the end. Once Seth Williams left Auburn, just didn't have that many playmakers on the outside to work with. Good for Bo Nix, good for Oregon. Big road win. And last thing I want to talk about here, and these last few topics, I'm not going to spend as much time on as I did at the beginning. Maybe 2021 Michigan State was a fluke. Obviously, they won a New Year's Six bowl. Kenneth Walker III at a Heisman level season at running back. Maybe they just suck, because this is back-to-back weeks where they've burned us from a betting perspective. We bet on them plus the 3.5 last week at Washington. Pass defense totally left us hanging out to dry. Now, I thought Peyton Thorne eventually played pretty well last week and got Michigan State back into that game. But what we saw yesterday against Minnesota was a joke. Minnesota goes into East Lansing and wins that game 34-7. I had a best bet on the over in that game. I had the Minnesota part of things right. I think that offense with Kirk Soraka back into the mix, Tanner Morgan plays, and he's a different animal under Kirk Soraka. That run game with Muhammad Ibrahim, Potts, as much depth as they have, they're going to be able to establish that run on anybody. I got that aspect of that matchup right. For Peyton Thorne and this Michigan State offense to put up 7 points, and really that 7 was a gift in the fourth quarter, that is inexcusable. Mel Tucker at this point, now he's not on the hot seat. You won 11 games last year, but man, I defended Michigan State coming into the year because a lot of people said, one hit wonder. I mean, you still had Peyton Thorne coming back, and The aspect that I got wrong, though, is, I mean, because remember, Kenneth Walker III wasn't a known commodity coming into last year. He was a transfer from Wake Forest that eventually developed into the player he was. They brought two more transfers in this year. Jarek Broussard from Colorado, Jalen Berger from Wisconsin. Both those guys were above 5 yards per carry coming into this season. They have stunk. I mean, they got no run game at this point. It is a disaster in East Lansing right now. I mean, this is a team that won a New Year's Six bowl game last year, and at this point looks like a 5-7 team. Now, I'm not saying they will go 5-7, but that's back-to-back weeks where you've looked pathetic in one way or another. So really, really bad day to be a Michigan State fan. Alrighty, guys, that's going to do it for today's episode. Appreciate y'all tuning in. I do these every week, every Sunday. So be sure you're subscribed to the channel and like the video if you enjoyed this episode. I'd really appreciate that. If I didn't get to any of the, I mean, obviously, kind of got to narrow it down to about 10, 11, 12 topics here. Obviously, there's more stuff that happened that I didn't talk about today. If you had anything that I didn't get to, leave that in the comments below, and I'll address it down there. Once again, thank you to our partner, Proud90 Golf. Go to proud90.com, use code Fordham, get you 15% off your entire order. The rest of the information, like I said, will be in the description below. Lots of content coming this week. We'll have a hot seat episode out probably on Tuesday. I'll look ahead at some of the biggest storylines heading into week 5, and then we'll have individual game breakdowns galore here this coming week for this week 5 slate. Appreciate y'all tuning in. Like, subscribe, comment. I'll be back here on Tuesday with a hot seat episode. Thank you, as always, for tuning in. College football is back. It's better than ever.